comparing vector p and vector q, what we can say, just by looking at it, we can say that the length or magnitude of vector p is bigger. The length of this line or ray, sorry, the length of this ray is bigger than the length of this ray. Okay, so vector p has higher magnitude compared to vector q. Okay, both are not equal, both the vectors, they are not equal, they have different magnitudes, but both of them are heading or pointing in the same direction. So vectors, which vector, if the two vectors, they don't have they have different magnitudes but they are pointing in same direction, then we call them as like vectors. So if the two vectors have the same direction but different magnitude, okay, then we call these two vectors as like vectors. So magnitude of vector p, as we can see, is not equal to magnitude of vector q. Q can be bigger than, q can be less than p, but it can never be equal to p. So two vectors having the same direction but different magnitudes, they are called like vectors. Okay, number two, and also they are pointing in the same direction. Point number three, unlike vectors. So what are unlike vectors? Again, we have seen till now what are equal vectors. Equal vectors have same magnitude and same direction. Then we have seen like vectors, they have different magnitudes but same direction, that is like vectors. Then unlike vectors, so let's say this is first vector, which is vector e, which is pointing in the west direction. Okay, and then we have a second vector, which is f, which is pointing on in the east direction. So when we compare, just by looking at the two vectors, if we compare both of them, what do we see? We see that length of vector f is more than the length of vector e. Okay, so e is smaller and f is bigger. Okay, so both of them, they have different magnitudes. Also, what we can see is one is pointing in other direction, west direction, and other is pointing in east direction. So two vectors having different magnitudes and different directions, very very important, different magnitudes as well as different direction, such two vectors, they are known as unlike vectors. So if two vectors have different magnitude, okay, because their lengths are different and different directions, then the two vectors, they are called as unlike vectors. So number one, we have studied about what are equal vectors. Number two, what are like vectors. Number three, what are unlike vectors. So what are equal vectors? Same magnitude and same direction. That means the vectors will have same length, same magnitude and same direction, equal vectors. Different magnitude but the same direction, then we call it as like vectors. Different magnitude and different directions, as we can see here, is known as, they are known as unlike vectors. So you can see the length of or magnitude of or value of e is not the same of value of f. In the above figure here, we can see that f is bigger than e, just by looking at the length of the line, we can say. Also, the first one is pointing in the west direction and the second one is pointing in the east direction, so they have different directions. Two vectors, if they have different magnitude, means length, and different directions, then we call the two vectors as unlike vectors. Very very important. Then number four, what is a negative vector? Okay, so what is a negative vector? So for example, let's say this is one vector, which is capital M bar. M bar is first vector, and then we also have a second vector. So just by looking at these two rays or diagrams, what can we see, or what we can infer? Just by looking at the diagrams, we can say that clearly the length of the vectors are same. Both the vectors, they have the same length, that means magnitude. Vectors having the same magnitude, but if we can see, they have different directions. So two vectors having equal magnitude or same magnitude but different directions are known as negative vectors. Okay, so if two vectors they have same magnitude, if we can see the length of both the rays are same, but both of them are pointing in opposite direction, very important, both of them should be pointing always in opposite directions, then and then only we call them as negative vectors. The magnitude, the length is same, but the direction is different. Fine. So we can see that magnitude of m or length of m is equals to the length of n or magnitude of n. Mod of m bar is equals to mod of n bar. Okay, so magnitudes are same, and first one is pointing in the direction of northwest, and the second one is pointing in the direction of southeast. So northwest and southeast are opposite directions. So what is this northwest uh, direction? Okay, any direction which is pointing between north and west. See, north is in upward direction and west is in left hand direction. Okay, so something which is pointing between them, okay, between north and west is known as northwest. Then similarly we have southeast, something which is pointing between south and east direction is known as southeast. So first of all we have studied about equal vectors, then we have seen like vectors, unlike vectors, and then we have talking about number 4, which is a negative vector. Okay, the next one, a unit vector. What is a unit vector? So unit vector is nothing but very simple, a vector whose magnitude, that means modulus of vector, is equal to 1. See, always unit vectors we generally use to show the direction. Okay, unit vectors they have value is equals to only 1. Okay, so generally in physics we use unit vectors to show the direction. Okay, unit vector always indicates the direction of something. Okay, so sometimes we also refer unit vectors as direction vectors. We also refer unit vectors as direction vectors. Now there is a different way in which these unit vectors are written. Okay, so here as you can see, instead of putting an arrow on the head of this capital A, we are putting a tilted line which is bent in the downward direction. So we call this tilted line as cap. Okay, cap means the hat which we wear basically. So a vector which is wearing a cap or a hat on it, on its top, is known as a unit vector. So this is how we represent a unit vector. A cap is a unit vector, and as we know the definition, a vector whose magnitude is equals to 1, that means what, modulus of a cap or mod of a cap is equals to how much, that is equals to 1. So this is what is known as a unit vector. A vector whose magnitude is equal to unity or whose magnitude is equals to 1 is known as a unit vector. Unit vector is also known as direction vector because we mostly use unit vectors to show the direction. So wherever you see a unit vector written, that means it is pointing towards some direction. We will see in the coming classes I cap, j cap and k cap. These are the unit vectors which are very important in physics. So this is one of the example, a cap. Then fifth vector, sixth type of vector is known as a null vector, which is not we have not written here. A null vector is basically a vector whose magnitude is equals to 0. That means the length of the vector is close to 0, very close to 0. A vector whose magnitude is equal to 0 is known as a null vector. So till now we have studied about total 6 different types of vectors. One, equal vectors, magnitude are same and directions are same. Then the second one we have seen is like vector. Like vector means magnitudes are different but direction is same. Then we have unlike vectors, magnitudes are different as well as the directions are different. And number 5, unit vector, magnitude of a vector is equals to 1, also known as direction vector, and it is written as a cap on its head. So a cap is known as a unit vector. I hope all of you are clear. And the last one we have seen is null vector. Excuse me. So a null vector is nothing but a vector whose modulus or whose magnitude is equals to unity.